This isn't the Wild West you saw in movies. This is the version they didn't want you to know. You're not stepping into a saloon with swinging doors or facing off in a high noon duel. No, you're trudging through Missouri mud in boots too worn for your age. The scent of hog pens thick in the air, and the world already feels like it's trying to break you. The year is 1860. Your name is Tom Horn. You're just a boy, but you're already watching, already calculating. The Civil War is barely in the rear view. And Missouri is torn in two, neighbors snitching on neighbors. Skirmishes turning into backyard bloodbaths. You grow up knowing that men don't always fight fair. And the ones who talk the least tend to live the longest. That's a lesson you swallow before most boys have their first shave. Your father's stern, real stern. He doesn't teach you how to hug or cry, but he sure teaches you how to shoot. By age 10, you dropped more varmints and raccoons than most adults. Not for sport, for survival. You eat what you kill. And sometimes, you kill what threatens the livestock. Or the family. It's a rough household, 10 kids. Backbreaking work. And a coldness that never lifts. Even when the fire's roaring. But that rifle? That's where you feel calm. The world makes sense when you look down a barrel. Aim, breathe, release. You get good. Too good. So good, in fact, that your father starts to fear you. That's when the beatings come. The accusations. One night, it gets real bad. You leave home, not with a tearful goodbye, but with a quiet walk into the dark. Your rifle slung over your shoulder. And not a single regret. You're 14, alone, broke, but you've got eyes that notice too much and a way of disappearing into backgrounds. You drift west, toward the Arizona territory, where rumors whisper of ranch work and open ranges. You lie about your age and smile like you belong. People hire you, and slowly, your world expands. Soon, you're picking up Spanish, fast. Faster than they expect. You listen more than you speak. And in time, Apache words join your arsenal. Language becomes your weapon, so does silence. A man at a trading post says you've got scout eyes. You don't know what that means. But the next day, a U.S. cavalry recruiter hands you a contract. They need someone who knows the land, the people, the danger. You do. You've lived it. And that's how a boy from a broken home finds himself riding through Mescalero country. Tracking boot prints no white man should be able to see. You're not enlisted like the other soldiers, you're hired. And you're better than them. You don't swagger. You don't brag. But when something moves in the brush, you hear it first. Historians still argue whether you were part of the official Apache campaigns or just a local fixer they kept off the paperwork. Doesn't matter to you. The blood's the same. The fear's the same. You ride alongside Alciber, the legendary chief scout, a man who swears like the devil and trusts you more than most. Together, you guide troops, translate with tribes, and map paths that weren't meant to be known. At 17, you've already seen men die from arrows, bullets, and bad decisions. One fringe story says you once tracked an Apache raiding party for 4 days without sleep, using broken twigs and the scent of horse sweat to lead a regiment straight to a hidden canyon. The officer got a medal. You got a nice job, son. You laugh about that sometimes. But when the sun sets, and the desert wind hums like an old lullaby, you feel something strange. Not fear, not pride, just detachment. You're not a soldier, not a settler, not even a proper outlaw. You're something else, a shadow that walks beside justice, but never touches it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep riding. Arizona turns into New Mexico, then into Colorado. You learn which cacti kill and which save. You learn that some men cry louder than they shoot. And you learn one last thing, maybe the most important of all. Justice is just a story. And you're real good at telling it with a rifle. The desert doesn't sleep. Not really. You hear it in the low rustle of mesquite trees. You feel it in the sudden hush before a distant coyote yips. You're no longer just riding beside soldiers, you're guiding them. You, Tom Horn, the wiry scout with eyes like flint and boots that haven't seen polish in years. The Army calls you an interpreter. What they really mean is someone who understands both sides enough to keep bullets from flying too soon. You speak Apache now, not fluently, but well enough to translate threats and promises. And well enough to know when the other side is lying. The Apache wars are brutal. You're stationed mostly in Arizona Territory, Chiricahua country. These aren't petty raids. These are survival skirmishes. And you're right in the middle. Sometimes you're helping negotiate peace. Other times, you're pointing toward a ravine and saying, "They're in there." Historians still debate your role during the surrender of Geronimo, whether you helped track him, or whether you just translated on the sidelines. You never talk about it. But Al Sieber does. He calls you a damn bloodhound with a conscience. You don't know if it's a compliment. You learn from Sieber how to read wind like a compass, how to tell if a horse has been watered recently just from its tracks, how to spot the difference between an Apache decoy fire and a real one. You soak it all in, like a sponge in a whiskey barrel. One story the old-timers pass around, probably more myth than fact, says you once rode 70 miles in 2 days just to deliver a wounded soldier's letter to his wife. When asked why, you just shrugged and said, "Seemed important." You're not heartless, but you are efficient. And as your reputation grows, so does the tension. You're too skilled for comfort. Officers start watching you like they're not sure whether to promote you or chain you. That's when you start hearing whispers about the Pinkertons. Not from the soldiers, but from visiting politicians, rail agents, and mining executives. They ask weird questions. Want to know if you can follow someone through a canyon undetected. Want to know if you'll take jobs that aren't on paper. You don't say yes, but you don't say no either. Then there's that one raid. The one no one writes down. A small Apache camp in the Dragoon Mountains. The troops wanted to go in loud. You suggested a quiet approach. The officer ignored you. Half the men didn't come back. The next morning, you walked into the smoldering wreckage alone. When you came back out, your hands were black with soot. You never said what you did, but no one questioned your judgment again. That was the beginning of the end for you in the Army. Not because you weren't valuable, but because you were too valuable. You knew too much, knew how to disappear, how to appear, how to get things done without asking permission. That's not the kind of man an officer wants sleeping under his tent flap. So you drift. Again, you take up odd jobs. Freight hauling, ranch wrangling. Occasionally you hire out as a tracker for mining companies worried about claim jumpers. You don't belong anywhere, but everyone seems to need you. Then, one hot afternoon in Santa Fe, a man in a clean vest and polished boots finds you sipping watered-down whiskey under a crooked awning. He introduces himself as a Pinkerton recruiter, says they need a man with your talents, discretion, fluency, and the ability to solve problems. You don't ask what kind. He doesn't offer. You shake hands. Later, people will say that moment is when Tom Horn sold his soul. But from where you're sitting, you didn't sell anything. You just shifted targets. Swapped a cavalry paycheck for one that didn't come with a uniform. The Pinkertons, oh, they're not what you expected. Less lawmen, more mercenaries in suits. Their files are thicker than a preacher's Bible. They know everyone, and they know who to watch. You're assigned to railroad detail first, protecting surveyors from angry locals. Then mine operators want troublesome union leaders followed. Then cattle barons whisper about rustlers, fences, and the need for quiet action. It's a dangerous dance. 1 minute you're sipping tea with the governor. The next, you're tracking a target through sagebrush, wondering if this time you're being used as a blade or a decoy. The West is changing fast. Fewer horses, more wire fences. Towns grow, laws tighten, And the kind of justice you grew up with, raw, personal, pragmatic, starts feeling like a crime in itself. One night, over poker, a Pinkerton colleague leans in and says, "They don't want men like us anymore. They want gentlemen with handshakes and lawyers with ledgers." He chuckles. "We're just ghosts still haunting their empire." You laugh, but you feel it too. A ghost can get things done, but it can't stay visible. That's when you start slipping into a new role. Still a tracker, still a scout, but now, something else. A problem solver with fewer questions. Ranchers start hiring you off the record. Tom Horn'll take care of it. They say, he knows how to talk to thieves. Talking, of course, means something different when your holster's never empty. You ride out under moonlight, talk to a rustler, then ride back alone, and suddenly, no more missing cattle, no more problems, no more witnesses either. They call you a legend, a necessary evil, a gentleman killer. You don't deny it, but every now and then, just before sleep, you wonder if there's a line you forgot to draw. Or if that line was erased long ago by the boots of men who needed you more than they feared you. You don't wake up one day and decide to be a bounty hunter. No, it happens slow, like dust settling in the cracks of a porch. One moment, you're helping a railroad man find his stolen horses. The next, you're riding after a rustler. And someone hands you a bonus for handling it quiet. And soon enough, people aren't calling you a scout anymore. They're calling you a fixer. Tom Horn, the man who finds things. The man who ends things. You've become something the newspapers won't print but ranchers whisper about behind swinging saloon doors. You show up when the law's too slow and the problem's too messy. They give you a name. Sometimes a photograph. Sometimes just a description and a map. You tip your hat, ride out alone, and most times, the problem goes away. It's not always bloodshed. Sometimes a firm warning does the trick. Sometimes a drunken brawl leads to someone falling off their horse and not waking up. Accidents happen out here, a lot. Historians still argue whether you kept records of your kills, if there was some secret ledger or list. Some say you memorized everything. Others claim you never kept track at all because, in your mind, none of it was personal. Just business. There's a particular kind of man who can shoot another dead in the dust and still sleep through a thunderstorm. You are that man. You're not proud, but you're not ashamed either. You work clean, you work fast, and you charge fair. Usually $500 per job, which is a small fortune for the time. But what they're really paying for isn't the trigger pull. They're paying for silence. You never talk out of turn. Never write letters. Never stay in one place long enough for people to ask questions. And that, more than your aim, is why the jobs keep coming. You ride into Colorado in 1895 and the land is boiling with tension. Cattle barons versus settlers. Open range versus fence posts. It's a war without uniforms. And you're the unofficial cavalry. The one-man ghost army hired to make sure the barons sleep better at night. Some ranchers claim you left calling cards. Notes stuck into fence posts that read, "Your next fence will be your last." Others say you only ever gave verbal warnings. One-to-one, face-to-face, no echoes. Just the sound of your spurs and the weight of your gaze. There's one case, half true, half legend, where you tracked a group of rustlers who had been stealing cattle under the cover of pine forest. Locals say you rode up to their campfire like a preacher delivering a sermon. You didn't shout, you just spoke, slow and deliberate. 3 men rode out that night. Only 2 came back. They left the cattle behind. No one pressed charges. One of those rustlers moved to Kansas, changed his name, lived out his days farming corn and never told his children why he limped. You become more than a man. You become a rumor wrapped in skin. Children are told, don't steal cattle or Tom Horn'll find you. Drunks swear they saw you in 3 towns at once. One dying man reportedly muttered your name in his sleep, even though he'd never met you. And the Pinkertons? They notice. They're not thrilled. You've become a liability, too rogue, Too visible. Too effective in ways that embarrass the official channels. They want deniability. You offer results. So they cut you loose. No formal dismissal. Just fewer letters. Fewer assignments. Then silence. You don't mind. You've got other work. A mining company in Montana hires you to handle labor unrest. You show up in a suit, clean boots, and a new revolver. You talk to a few organizers. One vanishes. The rest fall in line. You're paid in cash and told to never mention it again. You don't. Later, you'll tell people you weren't an assassin. That you never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. And maybe that's true. But whose definition of deserve are we using? The truth is, you became a bounty whisperer. Not because of how you killed, but because of how little you had to. The fear of Tom Horn did more work than the bullets ever did. You'd walk into a saloon and the room would quiet. Not out of respect. Out of calculation. What did you hear? Who were you here for? And how fast would someone die this time? There's one final ingredient to your reputation, your smile. You don't smile often, but when you do, it's the kind that makes men itch near their hip. It's not cruel. It's just confident, like someone who's never been caught, never been cornered, and never pulled the trigger unless the job was already done in his mind. One rancher in Wyoming summed it up best when he said, "Tom Horn doesn't miss, but it's worse when he doesn't fire at all. Because that means he's not here for you." Yet, the Pinkertons call you back in. Not officially. Not with a desk and a shiny badge, but with a handshake in the back room of a Denver hotel and a new assignment too sensitive for their newer, cleaner agents. You're older now. Not slow. Just more deliberate. Your reputation's grown longer than your shadow. You walk into town and sheriffs nod with a little too much respect. Not the kind they give politicians. The kind they give thunderstorms. The job? Track a murderer hiding among the rail crews near Pueblo. A brute of a man. Known to cut throats after he steals. They want him gone. Fast. Quietly. Bring him in if you can. They say. But we won't ask questions if you don't. You don't. You catch up with him near a creek. He tries to run. You give him a chance, one warning. Then one shot. He doesn't get another. You ride back alone. Say. He drew first. And no one pushes further. That's how it goes now. They all know the rhythm. Tom Horn doesn't tell stories, he finishes them. But the Pinkertons? They start pulling away again. You've gotten too effective at being you. Too loud in your silence. Too lethal in a world that's trying hard to look lawful. They're pivoting toward respectability. Contracts. Headlines. You're a relic now. Historians still debate whether they fired you or you just stopped showing up. Some say you saw the writing on the wall. Others claim they cut you loose after the Craig incident. A botched job where too many folks started asking the wrong questions. What matters is, you're free. And freelance. So you do what you do best. You drift into Wyoming. Into the cattle wars boiling under the surface. This isn't about fences anymore. It's about empire. The big ranchers. The Stock Growers Association, they don't want law. They want order. Their order. And you? You're the scalpel they use when things get infected. You take jobs, private. Off the record. Ranch hands disappearing after a warning shot. Rustlers found shot in the back. While fleeing. You never brag. But you never deny either. You've become a legend without needing ink. A quirky rumor spreads that you use a silver coin to decide whether to kill or just warn. Heads they live. Tails, they don't. You never confirm it. But sometimes you pull out a coin and flip it slow. Just to see how people squirm. You know what fear does. You use it like a craftsman uses a chisel. There's a case in 1898, up near Iron Mountain. A young settler family reports threats, cattle mutilations, and voices at night. They say someone's trying to scare them off the land. Sheriff shrugs. No leads. You show up. Quiet. Polite. The threats stop. No one asks why. One neighbor swears he saw you talking to a man under a juniper tree at dusk. The next day, that man was gone. Just gone. No note. No trace. Some say he moved to Nevada. Others think he's under that juniper. You don't comment, but you leave a horseshoe nailed to the family's barn. Upside down. Protection. Maybe. Or maybe a warning not to get too curious. There's poetry in how you operate. Not elegant poetry. Gritty. Bone-dry verse. Each job is a stanza. Each silence a line break. But then something shifts. The jobs start changing. They're not clean anymore. Not frontier justice. They're political. You're asked to shake down a newspaper editor. Then a union leader. Then a competitor of a local judge. You don't like it. Not because you have a moral compass, but because it's messy. Sloppy. The West is changing again. The cowboys are gone. The trains scream louder. The towns get bigger. Everyone's pretending the wilderness never existed. And you're stuck between. A ghost with a smoking gun in a world that wants to forget ghosts ever walked among them. Still, you take one last job for the Wyoming Cattle Association. An open-ended one. Keep the rustlers in line. They say, you know how. You nod. They pay well. But that job, it's the one that leads to the fall. Because one day, a boy dies. A 14-year-old named Willie Nickel. And suddenly, the West doesn't want ghosts anymore. It wants someone to blame. You're not scared. Not at first. You've been through worse. Much worse. But there's a new sheriff in town. And he's not looking for justice. He's looking for a headline. It starts with a knock. Not a frantic bang, just a polite, persistent knock on your hotel door in Cheyenne. You open it slowly, half expecting a drunk or a rancher with a new contract. Instead, it's a deputy, hat in hand, eyes shifty. You're needed downtown. Tom, you raise an eyebrow. Not because you're surprised, but because this isn't how these things usually go. You're used to being the one doing the knocking. They bring you in, sit you down, and start asking about Willie Nickel. You blink slow. The name's familiar. The boy, 14, found shot near his family's ranch. Father a suspected rustler. Fence cutter. Known to cross the wrong lines. Literally and figuratively. You don't deny knowing the area. Don't deny knowing the father. Kells Nickel. What you do deny is killing a boy. They press. You lean back. Let the silence stretch. Then they spring it. One of your drinking sessions, just a few nights prior. You'd been at the Inter-Ocean Hotel. A reporter named Charles O. LaFurs had offered you a few whiskeys. Said he admired your work. Said he wanted to hear the old stories. You obliged. You told him plenty. About the Apache campaigns. About your days with the Pinkertons. Maybe even about warning rustlers. Maybe more. Problem is, he was recording. No one told you. Now, they say, your own words are the rope tightening around your neck. Historians still argue whether that recording was doctored, or if your words were just braggadocio. A man trying to impress a listener over a bottle. But one thing's clear, that tape became evidence. And suddenly, you weren't Tom Horn, legendary scout. You were Tom Horn, child killer. The trial begins, and the press descends like buzzards. They love it. Frontier justice faces judgment. The hired gun who went too far. The headlines practically write themselves. You sit straight in court. Hands folded. Face unreadable. They parade witnesses. Ranchers who claim they overheard you threatening the Nickels. Lawmen who testify about your history of violence, and finally, that reporter, LaFurs, playing your voice on a crackling device like it's a ghost whispering from beyond. One line sticks. It was the best shot I ever made and the dirtiest trick I ever done. You hear your voice, your cadence, your breath between syllables, but you don't remember saying it. Or maybe, you do. But not like that, not in that way. The defense argues it was entrapment. That you were drunk, coerced. That the boy's death didn't fit your style. You didn't kill children. Never did. Never would. One quirky rumor floats through town. That a rival cattleman arranged the killing and pointed the trail straight to you. Too convenient. Too clean. The theory never makes it into court. But the jurors hear it anyway. Whispered in alleyways and church pews. You take the stand once. You speak slow, calm, almost bored. "I never killed that boy." You say, "I never aimed at anyone who hadn't already drawn their line in the dust." The courtroom freezes. A few scribes look up from their notepads. But the jury's eyes have already glazed. They've made up their minds. The details don't matter anymore. They want a villain with a face. And you've got the perfect one. When the verdict comes, guilty of first-degree murder, you nod once. No tears. No outburst. Just a quiet breath, like you'd been expecting this for years. Historians still debate the fairness of that trial. Whether the evidence truly held. Whether justice was done. But the law is a performance. And in this case, the crowd demanded a finale. You're sentenced to hang. The date is set. The town hums with gossip. Saloon conversations grow louder. Every barber and barkeep has an opinion. Most end the same way. "Well, I heard he killed 20 men. What's one more?" You receive letters. Some from strangers. Some from old friends. A few from women you barely remember meeting. They believe in you. Or they pretend to. The governor hesitates. A petition circulates. Some demand clemency. Others demand a quicker execution. Even President Theodore Roosevelt hears about it. He considers stepping in. Then steps back. You're too complicated. Too muddy. Not the kind of man a politician wants to save. So the date holds. The gallows are built. You ask for your boots to be polished. You say you'll go up those steps like a soldier. And you will. Because you've never run. Not from war. Not from ghosts. And not from this. The gallows stand tall against the Wyoming sky. Their beams cutting into the horizon like a verdict written in timber. You watch them build it. Quiet. Detached. One hammer stroke at a time. Each nail drives the story a little deeper. You don't flinch. You don't beg. You just nod politely to the carpenters. As if they're building you a porch swing. Inside the jail, it's calm. Almost too calm. You spend your time writing. Not confessions. No. Just reflections. Notes. A letter to your family. A few cryptic lines to a rancher who still owes you $75. And one long, strange message to a woman named Gwendoline Kimmel. The schoolteacher who once swore you were innocent. You thank her. You don't say for what. One of the guards says you sleep like a baby. You do. You always have. They try to measure your mind now. The press. They ask the warden. Does Tom Horn feel remorse? He shrugs. Tom Horn doesn't feel anything you can print in a newspaper. There's a rumor that you offered to hang yourself. Said you didn't want to waste the state's time or lumber. Another story claims you practiced the drop. Measured the fall with rope scraps in your cell. That part's true. You want it clean. No flailing. No spectacle. Historians still argue whether that was pride or professionalism. You say it was dignity. Same thing. Maybe. The day before the hanging. A newspaper photographer visits. Offers to take your picture, for posterity. You agree. But only if they let you wear your best hat. It's a wide-brimmed beauty. Dusted with trail and memory. You smile. Just barely. The photo becomes legend. People study your face for years after, trying to find the killer in the corners of your mouth. The assassin in your eyes. But all they see is calm. The night before, a local preacher visits, offers you a last confession. You thank him, politely decline. God and I are on speaking terms. You say, we just don't talk politics. He laughs. Uneasy. He doesn't come back. The morning of the execution. You dress slow. Button your shirt. Tuck in your collar. Lace your boots tight. No chains. No resistance. You ask for one thing only, that your horse be treated well. A quirky story will surface later that you whispered to the sheriff. Make sure they feed her oats. Not that dry hay. They walk you out as the sun rises. You climb the steps yourself. No stumble. No hesitation. You look out over the crowd, politicians, cowboys, reporters, and curious townsfolk. A few cheer. Most stay silent. Somewhere, a child cries. Maybe from fear. Maybe from heat. You stand tall. One final breath. The sheriff asks if you have last words. You smirk. Killing me won't bring him back. Then, this is the first time I've ever been hanged for something I didn't do. And that's it. The lever pulls. The trapdoor opens. And Tom Horn drops into history. Historians still debate whether your neck broke clean or if the rope stretched. Some say you died instantly. Others claim it took 17 minutes. The truth is lost in shadows. But one thing remains. You didn't scream. You never screamed. A journalist writes later. He went down like a man who'd seen death too many times to fear it anymore. And with that, the chapter closes. Except, it doesn't. Because the legend of Tom Horn doesn't end at the gallows. It starts there. You'd think the story ends with a rope. But it never does. After your death, something strange happens. The air doesn't clear. The dust doesn't settle. In fact, it stirs up worse. Suddenly, everyone's talking about you. Not just in Cheyenne, but across the entire country. Even overseas, you become a myth. A conversation, a mystery that refuses to be buried. Books are written. Some paint you as a cold-blooded killer. The man who finally paid the price for years of unspeakable sins. Others see you as a martyr. A relic of a dying West. Sacrificed on the altar of progress. Historians still argue whether the evidence against you would hold in a modern courtroom. The recording, they say, was shady. The witnesses were weak. The motives murky. But truth, as you well know, rarely wins the trial. It's all about the story. And your story? It was too good not to end with a hanging. Over time, the facts blur. The Willie Nickel case becomes a sort of Western Rorschach test. Those who want to believe in frontier justice say you were the necessary evil finally caught. Those who mourn the old ways claim you were a scapegoat. An outlaw made to fit a narrative convenient for politicians and property lines. A peculiar detail begins to resurface. The boy you were accused of killing? Willie? He wasn't supposed to be there that morning. He'd taken an unusual path. Something he didn't often do. Some say he wasn't the target at all. Just in the wrong place. At the worst time. And you? Maybe just close enough to be useful. That theory grows legs. Conspiracy or coincidence? Hard to tell when so many players had so much to gain from your fall. Your friends, or what's left of them, speak carefully. A few defend you outright. Others nod solemnly but say nothing. Silence becomes the loudest eulogy you get. Years later, Cheyenne holds a mock retrial. No joke. In 1993, a group of historians, students, and amateur lawyers stage a full re-examination of your case. New evidence is presented. The public's invited to watch. And after deliberation, the modern jury reaches a new verdict. Not guilty. Too little. Too late? Sure. But also, strangely fitting. You weren't made for that century. Or this one. You were born in the space between law and chaos. Raised by hardship. Sharpened by conflict. Hired by men who pretended they never knew your name. And in the end, hung by a town that needed closure more than it needed truth. A quirky little poem gets published in a local paper not long after. Tom Horn rode tall, with no excuse. A hired hand set sometimes loose. He lived by skill, and died by blame, but no one ever quite proved his name. You would have liked that. Simple, pointed, unresolved. Some say they've seen your ghost near Iron Mountain. A tall man on horseback. Silent, just beyond the tree line. He doesn't wave, doesn't ride forward, just watches. Maybe it's not true. Maybe it is. Doesn't matter. Because you didn't die with your boots off. You didn't die afraid. You didn't even die alone, not really. You died remembered. And in the West, that's all that matters. Your name starts doing something strange. It becomes shorthand, not just for fear, but for control. Ranchers tell stories about you to keep hired hands in line. Don't go rustling, or Tom Horn'll come back from the dead and settle it himself. A chuckle follows, but no one laughs too loud. Your legend becomes a tool. Even decades after your execution, new generations of cattlemen in Wyoming and Colorado speak of you like a spirit with unfinished business. You're not a man anymore. You're an atmosphere. Historians still argue whether that's earned or invented, whether your reputation came from your deeds or from the silence you left behind. Because that's the thing. The details of what you actually did grow thinner by the year. But the shape of you, the idea of you, grows thicker. It's what you represented. A man who didn't wait for orders. Who didn't hesitate. Who finished things. That unsettles people. Because once you strip away the romance, it leaves a difficult question. How many of your contracts were justice, and how many were just convenient removals? A fringe theory starts floating in academic circles. Some suggest the Willie Nickel case was a setup. Not just a political show trial, but a calculated purge. You'd become too unpredictable, too powerful. You knew too much. Had too many powerful clients with too many bloody secrets. So they found the nearest loose thread, and pulled. And you unraveled. There's no proof, of course. There never is with legends. But one curious researcher in the 1970s found letters suggesting that certain cattle barons, your former employers, had quietly funded the prosecution. Not publicly. Not in writing. Just support. Backroom nudges. Donations to campaigns. Subtle pressure. They needed the myth of Tom Horn. They just didn't want the man around anymore. There's irony in that. You became exactly what the West always wanted: tough, loyal, decisive, and they killed you for it. Because by 1903, that kind of man wasn't a solution. He was a liability. Newspapers began printing stories not about you, but about the West needing to change. Tame it, they said. Civilize it. Turn outlaws into ranchers. Turn ranchers into businessmen. And ghosts like you? They had to go. But oh, they couldn't forget you. You're referenced in dime novels. Whispered in cowboy songs. Even Hollywood starts sniffing around your name. One early silent film tries to adapt your life, but the studio sanitizes it. Makes you a misunderstood hero. Which, funnily enough, may have been the closest thing to the truth they ever told. Meanwhile, in Cheyenne, a bar keeps your hat under glass. Tourists snap pictures. Locals tell them, he once drank here, right there at the end stool. Whether you did or didn't, it doesn't matter. They believe it. That's your gift, or your curse. You left just enough behind to be remembered, but not enough to be known. And so, people fill in the blanks. One quirky detail: your old Colt revolver. The one with the ivory handle? It was auctioned in 1941. The buyer didn't even shoot. Just wanted to own a piece of the myth. He kept it in a display case next to a signed copy of Buffalo Bill's Wild West Almanac. Your pistol next to a showman's poster. You'd have rolled your eyes. Then probably smiled. Because deep down, you knew this day would come. The day when stories outlived bullets. When words did the killing. When men didn't need rifles, they just needed the right name to drop. Yours, Tom Horn. Triggerman, tracker, whispered threat, necessary evil, or just the West doing what it always does, building its future by burying its past. And here's the thing about ghosts: they don't need to be real to haunt you. After you drop through the gallows, your shadow lingers in places your boots never stepped. Men start claiming you trained them, that they rode with you, learned your tricks. Suddenly, everyone's a friend of Tom Horn. Most are lying, but no one cares. Because invoking your name gives them weight, credibility, fear. You become a credential. Need to threaten a fence cutter? Mention Tom Horn. Want to sound tough in a saloon fight? Say you once drank whiskey with him. Need to sell a few extra cattle at a loss? Blame rustlers, and say Horn would have known what to do. You're useful, even in death. Especially in death. But the legend starts to mutate. Grow tentacles. New stories crop up. Stories that make you out to be some kind of ghostly vigilante. One says you returned from the grave to save a rancher's daughter from kidnappers. Another claims your spirit haunts the Laramie Range, riding alongside lost cowboys and warning them when storms approach. Historians dismiss most of it, but some lean in. They point to the consistency in the myths. The calm demeanor, the silent appearance, the single bullet, it all fits too well. One open scholarly debate centers on your actual kill count. Some say 10, others claim it was over 20. A few argue you killed fewer people than your myth suggests, just that your reputation did most of the heavy lifting. And honestly, that sounds about right, because the truth is, you were never loud, never boastful, never flashy, but you were deliberate, calculated, and people fear precision more than rage. You weren't the man who shot in a barroom brawl. You were the one who'd sit in the shadows, wait until the noise faded, then deliver justice with a single word, or a single pull of the trigger. There's a story, possibly true, possibly whiskey-born, of a ranch hand in 1902 who'd been accused of stealing calves. Before anyone could confront him, he rode 2 towns over, knocked on the sheriff's door, and demanded to be jailed. Why? The sheriff asked. Because I heard Tom Horn might be looking for me. You weren't. You were in Cheyenne by then, awaiting trial. But the man still slept behind bars that night. That's how deep your name sank into the soil. And yet, even with all the noise, the mystery, the myth, the Willie Nickel question never really dies. Not entirely. Every few years, a new author dusts it off, re-interviews locals, tries to reconcile your skills with the chaos of the crime. A child shot from behind. No warning, no signature. It doesn't fit. You had a code. Quiet, yes. Brutal, often, but a code nonetheless. No kids. Never kids. Some say that's proof you were innocent. Others say the guilt ate at you, that maybe that one job was a mistake. A misfire. A botched hit meant for the boy's father. And that the whiskey-soaked confession was your twisted way of bleeding it out. But if there's a moment of doubt in you, it never shows. Not on the witness stand. Not on the gallows. Not even in your last letter. You leave behind no apology. Only a trail. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Because when all the facts blur, when the last photograph fades, what remains is the outline of a man no one could quite define. Lawman or outlaw, killer or scapegoat, cowboy or mercenary, you were all of them. Or none. And in that ambiguity, you became immortal. Cheyenne can't let you go. After your hanging, they talk about you like you're still around the corner, leaning against a post, chewing on a strip of jerky while sizing up everyone who walks by. It's eerie, like they expect you to stroll back into town, brush off the dust, and order a drink. The Inter-Ocean Hotel becomes a shrine of sorts. Folks whisper about that infamous night when Charles LaFers got you drunk. They argue over what you actually said, whether you confessed, or just spun a drunken tale to entertain a man who was more snake than journalist. The tape, well, the scratchy device that captured your voice, turns into an artifact. A cursed one. Almost. Historians still debate if LaFers set you up on orders from the cattle barons or if he acted alone. Chasing fame. Either way, that recording sealed your fate tighter than any rope could. A man's words can be deadlier than bullets. You knew that, but you also knew something else. If you're going to be remembered, better to be remembered sharp, not dull. There's a story, often told but never verified, that you smirked in the cell when they played back your words. Sounds like a man who knew what he was doing. You reportedly said, then you asked for another shot of whiskey. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's just another piece of the growing Horn mythology. Nobody can say. Meanwhile, the Willie Nickel case grows bigger than the boy himself. His family splits under the scrutiny. Kells Nickel, hard, stubborn, angry, claims he always knew you'd kill his son. Neighbors mutter that Kells had more enemies than cattle, and that anyone with a grudge could have pulled that trigger. Yet the sheriff clings to the story that the legendary Tom Horn finally slipped. And Cheyenne eats it up. The trial turns into a circus. Reporters pack the gallery. Headlines scream about the gunman who hunted humans like cattle. You sit there, stoic, while they describe you as if you were born from brimstone. A quirky detail? During one recess, A curious reporter asked how many men you'd killed. You tilted your hat and replied, "Not as many as you've buried with your stories." It wasn't printed, but it was whispered. In your quieter moments, you notice something unsettling. The world is changing. Not the wide, sweeping plains. That part's the same, but the rules. The law is turning bureaucratic. People don't want rugged men anymore, they want respectable ones. Judges, sheriffs, politicians, men who smile for the camera and shake hands while they gut each other behind the curtains. You don't fit. You never could. So they make you into a symbol of what they want to bury, the wildness, the unpredictability, the willingness to settle a dispute with a rifle instead of a courthouse. When the verdict is handed down, you don't flinch. You've faced worse odds before: raiding parties, ambushes, drunken shootouts in half-lit saloons. But here, in this clean courtroom with its polished floors and respectable crowd, you feel something colder. A verdict handed down not by survival, but by politics. You start counting the days. The guards notice how you pass the time. You sharpen pencils with a pocket knife. You hum old Apache war songs, quiet and low. One guard swears you whittled a tiny wooden horse, then gave it to a kid visiting the jail. No one knows where it ended up. Maybe on some dusty mantle, mistaken for a toy. And through it all, you never beg. Not once. When LaFurs visits you after the verdict, maybe out of guilt or maybe to gloat, you give him a long, hard stare. You'll have to live with it. You tell him, "I won't." It rattles him, enough that he leaves without finishing his drink. The town buzzes about your execution like it's a social event. Ladies sew black ribbons. Men place bets on your last words. Some even reserve spots near the gallows, like they're buying tickets for a theater show. You're the star they can't stop talking about. And you know exactly how to give them a finale they'll never forget. You've always known the stage matters. Not the courtroom, not the gallows, the legacy. The whisper in the wind long after your boots stop stirring up dust. And you're smart enough to control it. So in the final days, you stop speaking, not out of fear, not out of defiance, but out of strategy. Every silence becomes a headline. Every unanswered question, a new chapter in someone else's version of your story. You give them nothing, and in doing so, you give them everything. Historians still debate whether this was intentional, whether you were crafting your own myth by omission. Some call it genius, others call it madness, but those who knew you best understood. Tom Horn was never a man to waste words. Especially not on people who already decided what they wanted to believe. Meanwhile, the politicians keep their distance. Governor Chatterton receives hundreds of telegrams urging a stay of execution. Some from cattlemen, some from ordinary citizens, some from big names in Denver who'd quietly hired you before. But none of them want the blame of saving you. Not now. They all liked you better when you were just a rumor. A curious thing happens in the press. After spending months painting you as a monster, they start to soften. Reporters begin writing about your composure, your quiet dignity. They quote your deadpan jokes, your hand-carved trinkets. One even calls you the most polite man ever to face the gallows. The public can't decide if they want to fear you or forgive you. And while the town debates your soul, you prepare your boots. You polish them daily, not for comfort, for the fall. Let the rope stretch, not my dignity. You mutter one night. A guard writes it down, unsure if it's poetry or sarcasm. Probably both. A few days before your execution, they allow a visit from Gwendoline Kimmel, the schoolteacher who swore you were innocent. She arrives in a dark dress, eyes like questions. She doesn't cry. You don't explain. You sit in silence for 10 minutes. Then hand her a folded letter. Burn it, you say, or don't. She nods. No one ever learns what it said. You start to notice the way people look at you, curious. Not cruel, like a wolf in a museum. Some come to see if you'll break. Some come hoping you won't. Either way, they leave change. There's a quirky rumor that one guard tried to recruit a violinist for your final morning. Said you liked music. That guard, it said, was turned down by every musician in Cheyenne. No one wanted to play the soundtrack for Tom Horn's death. Not out of protest, out of respect. Execution day approaches. The scaffold creaks in the wind. You ask for two things: your hat and your horse. They give you the hat. The horse, they say, is already gone. You nod, not disappointed, just sad you didn't get to say goodbye. On the last night, you sleep deeply, like you always do. Dreamless. Some guards stay up watching you. One swears he saw you smile in your sleep. At dawn, the town wakes early. They pretend it's for errands or business. But they all know why their boots hit the boardwalk before sunrise. The streets hum, and when you step outside, people fall quiet. You walk to the gallows like you're heading to a barn chore. Upright, unbothered, like a man who's already made peace with everything except bad rope work. One young reporter in the front row scribbles furiously. He's never seen a man walk to death without a tremor. The sheriff asks, "Any last words?" You tip your hat, just a little. "I guess this is it." Then, almost as an afterthought, "Keep the dust off my saddle." The crowd barely breathes. The trapdoor creaks. And down you go. No twitch. No gasp. Just silence. The kind that stays long after the crowd disperses. They bury you quietly. No parade. No rifle salute. Just a pine box. A patch of dry ground. And a handful of onlookers who don't speak much. A priest mumbles a blessing. Someone tosses a handful of dirt. The grave marker reads simply, Thomas Horn Jr., 1860 to 1903. He never spoke falsely. You would have liked that, direct, unadorned, and vague enough to spark arguments for a century. And spark they did. Your death didn't end anything. It started a war of narratives. The very next morning, Cheyenne newspapers clash in tone. The Cheyenne Daily Leader runs a cold headline, "Tom Horn hanged without incident." The Wyoming Tribune, by contrast, calls it a tragedy of justice. Letters pour in from across the country. Some curse your name, others call for posthumous pardon. One man from Texas writes, "If Horn's guilty, then so are half the ranchers from El Paso to Montana." Another calls you a murderer and prays for your soul, signed only. A father. But the most unexpected voice? A former Pinkerton contact. He pens a letter to a Denver paper, calling your trial politically convenient and morally vague. He doesn't defend your record. He doesn't deny your past. But he questions whether you killed Willie Nickel. It causes a stir. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association goes quiet. Which is suspicious. You had worked for them. After all, off the books, but well paid. Their silence becomes another kind of confession. Historians still argue whether they were behind the scenes of your trial, pushing, nudging, whispering. It's hard to prove, but easy to suspect, especially since several members of the prosecution suddenly found themselves with new appointments and raises soon after. You see how this works. Even in death, your name moves money. In Laramie, a bar carves your silhouette into the side of the bar rail. Not for glory, just because people keep asking which table was Tom Horn's spot. Never mind you only drank there once. The myth drinks more than you ever did. The weirdest tribute? A group of reenactors starts staging your trial once a year in Cheyenne. Complete with period costumes, fake witnesses, even a judge with a wax mustache. Tourists eat it up. Theaters pack out. Children gasp when the fake you is sentenced to hang. You become performance art. And yet, there's dignity in it. Even if it's strange. A quiet dignity. Like a legend too sharp to fade. The only ones who never speak your name again? The Nickel family. They move. Quietly. No public interviews. No memoirs. Just a quiet vanishing. People say Kells Nickel drank himself silent. Haunted not just by his son's death, but by the doubt. The kind that eats you when you realize the man you hated might have been innocent. Sometime later, a rusted revolver is found under a tree near the Nickel Ranch. Not yours. Smaller caliber. No one knows how long it had been there. The papers don't print it. Too complicated. Too late. But you'd have smirked. Not for vindication, but for the irony. Because the truth never mattered much out here. Not when there were stories to sell. Years pass, and your grave becomes a pilgrimage. It starts slow. A drifter here, a cowboy there. They leave little things, bullet casings, horsehair braid, a folded whiskey label with, "You did what you had to," scribbled in pencil. Nothing official, no plaques, just offerings. You're not a hero. You're something else. Something murkier. A mirror for men who live in between law and lawlessness. Duty and damnation. They see in you what they're afraid to become, or maybe what they already are. And what makes it stick is that you never left behind a clean version of yourself. No memoir, no confession, no public plea, just silence. So they fill in the blanks. In the decades after, books get published. Some claim to reveal the real Tom Horn. Others read more like pulp westerns, full of shootouts you never had and romances you never wanted. One even says you were a secret Confederate spy. That one gets filed under fiction. But it still sells. Even the movies try to cash in. The first film version of your life, Tom Horn, 1980. Starring Steve McQueen, makes you into a rugged antihero. The script softens your edges, trims your violence, adds a romance, and frames you as a man betrayed by a world that changed too fast. And while that may be true, it's also too tidy. Historians still argue whether that version helped or hurt your legacy. Some say it brought sympathy. Others say it buried your complexity beneath Hollywood tropes. You weren't just a victim. You weren't just a killer. You were a man who lived in the blind spot of justice. And that's harder to package, but more powerful. Meanwhile, in the dusty records of the Wyoming State Archives, your case file remains one of the most requested. Students write essays, professors give lectures, and somewhere in almost every one, the same quote surfaces: "Killing me won't bring him back." It sticks because it's not about innocence. It's about inevitability. You didn't deny the world was unfair. You banked on it. One lesser-known story involves a rancher named Alan Wright, who hired you back in '97 to discourage a group of rustlers. After your execution, Wright reportedly wept, not because you died, but because, in his words, "We killed the only man who kept the peace out here." He wrote a letter to the Cheyenne Daily Sun, unsigned, saying, "Tom Horn didn't fail justice. Justice failed Tom Horn. It never ran, but copies of it still circulate among certain circles, old cattlemen, history buffs, Western romantics. They print it out, pin it on corkboards. Keep your name alive not because you were perfect, but because you fit the West the way it used to be. Efficient, unforgiving, precise. One quirky legend claims that your boots were never buried with you. That they were kept by a guard who feared you'd need them again. The boots were passed down, generation to generation, and supposedly still sit in a closet in Casper. They've never been authenticated. They don't need to be. Because like everything about you, truth and myth have blurred beyond recognition. You've become folklore. Not just a man who lived, but a warning. A question mark with a revolver. By the time the 20th century rolls in at full speed, you're no longer just a Western figure. You're a fixture. A symbol stitched into the fabric of a world that doesn't want to remember what it took to build itself. Skyscrapers rise. Typewriters give way to telegraphs. Then phones. Horses vanish under the rumble of Fords. But you remain, stuck in amber, preserved in a time when justice was delivered with spurs, not subpoenas. And people keep looking back. Because even in their shiny new cities, they still whisper about you. Tom Horn, the one who knew how to make a man disappear without a trace, and how to do it with the kind of calm that made witnesses shiver. Historians still argue over the impact of your trial. Some say it was the last gasp of frontier justice, the end of an era when problems were solved over campfires and barrels. Others claim it was a beginning, a symbol of how America started choosing spectacle over truth. And that's what your trial was, a spectacle. A performance scripted by politicians, padded with hearsay, and sold to the public like a Sunday show. But you never read from their script. You just stood there, unmoved. There's a fringe theory, more poetry than proof, that says you wanted to get caught. That after all the blood and silence, you were tired, ready, not afraid of death, just bored of avoiding it. It's a compelling idea, but those who really knew you would scoff. You weren't tired. You were just done trusting anyone who didn't pay up front. After your hanging, other hired guns disappear from the scene. The message is clear. There's no more room for men who live by their own rules. The West is buttoning up its collar, cleaning the blood from its boots. But now and then, in the lonelier corners of the prairie, an old rancher still tells his grandson, "Back in my day, we had a man who could end a war with one bullet. His name was Tom Horn." They never say it loud, just enough to give the boy goosebumps. Meanwhile, your grave becomes one of the most visited in the cemetery. Tourists leave notes, coins, cigarettes. One even left a full revolver once, unloaded. But symbolic. The sheriff confiscated it, but the message was clear. You're still armed in memory. And if that isn't legacy, what is? A quirky modern tribute? A country singer releases a song titled Horn's Last Ride. It's gritty, slow, with a steel guitar crying under lyrics like, "He rode where the lawman feared to tread, and slept with ghosts beneath his bed." It charts well, especially in Wyoming. Even now, you get fan mail. Schools sometimes assign your trial as a mock debate. Half the class defends you. The other half prosecutes. The teacher always ends it the same way. There's no right answer, just a dusty trail of questions. Because you weren't just a man who pulled triggers. You were a test of how much a country is willing to forgive when it benefits from what it wants to bury. And in that sense, you're still pulling the strings. Time is supposed to wash things away. It smooths the sharp edges, dulls the noise, erases the names of men who once stood 10 feet tall in the minds of those who feared or followed them. But not you. You don't fade. You multiply. Every decade, someone rediscovers you. A journalist digs into old court records and finds holes the size of Wyoming canyons. A grad student writes a thesis titled, Horn, the Hammer, Deconstructing the Frontier Scapegoat. A novelist rewrites you as a tragic antihero. You become all things to all people. And none of them can agree on what you really were. And you'd laugh if you could hear them. All that arguing, all that digging, when you already knew what mattered. That the line between justice and convenience is just a question of who's holding the shovel. You held it for years. Now, they dig through your past like treasure hunters who've forgotten what dynamite smells like. Your story keeps ending, and keeps starting over. Historians still argue whether you knew about Willie Nichols' routines, whether you staked him out, whether the shot was precise or accidental. There's even a shaky theory that someone else fired the bullet, and you took the fall because your myth was just too perfect to waste. A quick, dirty end to a complicated man. You've become a teaching tool, a cautionary tale, a symbol of the moment when the wild ways of the West were finally put to rest, not by force, but by optics. The governor who signed your execution order was re-elected. The sheriff got a new office. The reporter got a promotion. You got a story no one can stop telling. And maybe that's all you ever wanted. Not forgiveness, not fame, just a place in the memory of a country that forgets almost everything else. A quirky legend persists in a small Wyoming town near your old haunts, that on cold nights, when the wind howls just right, you can hear the distant echo of a horse's hooves across the plains. Not fast, not panicked, just steady, measured, like a man riding to settle something the courts never could. In the end, Tom Horn isn't a name. It's a question, a myth carried in a saddlebag, strapped to a gun belt, hidden beneath a dusty hat brim. And the answer? Still riding. So now, As the fire burns low in your imagination and the shadows grow long across that quiet stretch of Wyoming dirt. Let your breathing slow. You've walked beside a man built from grit and rumor. Framed by history. Haunted by questions that still linger like smoke in canyon air. It's okay to feel a little uneasy. After all, the West doesn't always give you clear heroes, or clean villains. Tom Horn lived in the in-between. The pause between gunfire. The space between justice and revenge. A man carved out of contradiction, respected. Feared, hated, admired. A name they couldn't forget. Even if they tried. And here you are, still thinking about him. Not because of how he died. But because of what he represents. A world where decisions were final. Consequences were swift. And reputation could either save you, or hang you. So wherever you are, whatever time it is, let the mystery settle in your chest like dust after a ride. Maybe the truth matters. Maybe it doesn't. But you followed the trail all the way here. You earned your rest. Now let your thoughts drift like prairie wind. Let your pulse soften. Let the night close in. Gentle and wide. Because out there, somewhere beyond the last fence post and under the whisper of stars, Tom Horn still rides.